On April 1st of 1939, Generalissimo Franco marched his army into the city of Madrid, claiming victory in the brutal, 3-year-long Spanish Civil War. How did Franco, the unassuming military general, win this war and cement his place as the caudillo of Spain for the next 40 years? In 1902, Alfonso XIII was crowned King of Spain at only 16 years old. Despite his age, King Alfonso had absolute authority over the nation. Because of his young age and lack of wisdom, Spain suffered massive political instability as a direct result of his leadership. Easily persuaded, the young Alfonso would cede most of his power to the local dictator Miguel Primo de Rivera, giving him primary control over Spain. Rivera would only last until 1930, though, when he was replaced. Heading into the Great Depression, the Spanish economy would suffer incredibly. As a result of this, and a mix of political instability that's been ravaging the country, the unhappy people of Spain were tired of the system and sought radical change. The dictatorship was replaced by an election-holding republic, though this only proved to anger the people more. This unrest resulted in most people leaning towards political extremes. On one side, people supported nationalists and fascists, and on the other, the Republicans and communists had their supporters. The election results of 1936 split the country down the middle, and the people of Spain were more polarized than ever before. The nation was primed for a civil war. Meanwhile, in Spain's African territories, a certain General Francisco Franco was watching the political instability from his post in the Canary Islands. A solid believer of fascist and nationalist ideas, Franco would use this to his advantage. He began training troops in Spanish-occupied Morocco under his rule, and before long organized a fighting force that was loyal to him. According to historian Wolf Heberlein, the so-called Army of Africa was trained on the Francoist principle of eliminating communism in Spain before it had the chance to spread. To further seize his opportunity, Franco collaborated with his allies. Miguel Primo de Rivera's son, José Antonio Primo de Rivera, was a fellow fascist and leader of the Spanish Falangist Party at the time. Believing in the same goals and wishing to unite Spain under fascism, Franco and Primo de Rivera together would organize the revolution against the existing Spanish government. On July 17, 1936, Francisco Franco's forces attempted a coup on the capital city of Madrid. It was a failure, but the Spanish Civil War was now underway. This set the battlefield for the war. The Nationalists held most of Andalusia and Castilla y León, while the Republicans held most of the peninsula. At once, chaos broke out throughout Spain. The Spanish Civil War is often thought of as the precursor to the Second World War. As the war progressed, both sides of the conflict received volunteer forces from major powers in Europe. Franco's nationalists were backed by Hitler's Nazi forces, troops from Italy, and open support from the Catholic Church, while the Republicans had extreme support from the Soviet Union. More than this, while the British never officially supported either side, factions of British workers, such as one notable George Orwell, fought in the war as well. Some make the argument that as the war escalated, it became more of a proxy conflict between the Nazis and the Soviets. Regardless, the war was very brutal for all involved, and the conflict was a particularly hard-fought one for Franco. His military expertise was limited, so his fighting wasn't the highlight of his side of the war. In fact, according to a journal article by Paul Preston, Franco was explicitly disregarded by Hitler in terms of military prowess. The Führer himself claims that Franco was very lucky to have the support of German and Italian forces. Generally, this sentiment was echoed by many other leaders at the time, and it's thought that Franco would not have won this war without foreign support. However, extremely early into the war, Franco would already see his first strides towards victory in spite of his military incompetence. Since Franco's elite forces had more time to organize and prepare, they took an early advantage in the war against the Spanish Republic, who had to frantically and rapidly mobilize in response to the coup. In addition to this, a lot of the immediate territory that Franco controlled was agrarian, and the people were already supportive of Primo de Rivera and by extension, Franco's movement. This meant that, early in the war, Francoist forces walked into land uncontested, securing a lot of food for the nationalist-occupied land. Since the fascists had most of Spain's agrarian territory, they were able to aptly supply both the armies and the occupied territories with food throughout the duration of the war, while the rest of Spain would soon fall into famine. As the war progressed, it fell into a stalemate. In the north, fighting was incredibly fierce. The Battle of Bilbao was undoubtedly one of the hardest-fought battles of the war. Surrounded by nationalists of all sides, Bilbao served as a Republican stronghold in the north, but seemingly refused to fall. It held out against all odds for months, until eventually caving to nationalist forces in June of 1937. While Bilbao was a long-lasting battle that exhausted a portion of nationalist resources, the same cannot be said about the neighboring city. In April of 1937, the Nazi Luftwaffe rained powerful bombs down onto the city of Guernica, killing hundreds of civilians and destroying the city. Pablo Picasso's famous painting with the same name depicts these actions. This bombing shows just how much of a precursor this war was to World War II. The loss of both of these cities made the war look increasingly like a nationalist victory, but there's one more factor in this war that would rear its head. The CNT-FAI, or CNT-FAI, an anarcho-syndicalist group concentrated in Catalonia. These group of laborers saw the opportunity to get the power they desired and seized it. The war had created a vacuum of power in Catalonia, and the CNT-FAI quickly became the de facto force in the area. Nearly every common citizen would align with the beliefs of the CNT-FAI as it stood for the workers, and the lack of government led to relative peace in the area. As the war escalated, though, both forces were closing in on Catalonia, and the war would be fought between all three factions after the workers of the CNT-FAI mobilized and prepared to hold their ground. Albert Jensen, a syndicalist from Sweden, claims that one of the primary goals of the CNT-FAI at the time was to combat fascism in Spain, and the able-bodied population in Catalonia was fighting much more against Franco's forces than the Republicans. Anarchist Catalonia would still function during the war, and influential author and soldier George Orwell would visit the area and write that it was the first time I had ever been in a town where the working class was in the saddle. Every shop and cafe had an inscription saying that it had been collectivized. Waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. While anarchist Catalonia was against both parties and fought against both, this development would prove to hinder the Republicans more than the nationalists. Since Catalonia was originally a Republican territory, the CNT-FAI uprising had left the Republicans without their only major city besides Madrid, Barcelona. The lack of Republican control over the area would allow Franco and the Nazi forces to make a strong push to the coast, separating Catalonia from the rest of Spain. Over the next few months, the nationalists would push forward into the isolated state, defeating the CNT-FAI and securing Barcelona as a nationalist stronghold. Just weeks later, on April 1st of 1939, nationalist forces would take Madrid, which they had been laying siege to since the beginning of the war, and the Second Spanish Republic would surrender, securing Franco's victory. So how did he do it? All cards played in Franco's favor. By building power in numbers, securing critical areas, and getting support from foreign powers, Franco gained both supplies and the people's support so that he could easily overthrow the Spanish Republic. The areas he controlled were perfectly primed to support him. People were eager to support him, and supplies kept his occupied areas from starving and his soldiers well fed. The support offered from the outside may have been the most substantial key to Franco's victory, but regardless, the war played out in his favor, allowing him to have one of the longest fascist regimes in human history, lasting up until his death in 1975. According to historian Sandy Holguin, Franco served as a passive ally to Hitler and Mussolini during World War II, but did not fight in the war due to being too financially fractured to join in. This allowed Franco to continue his reign far after World War II. His unlikely victory in the Spanish Civil War was incredibly pivotal for Franco, and it sealed the fate of Spain for the next 40 years.